They didn't ring the doorbell. They walked straight through my garden gate, past the magnolia Thomas planted on our wedding day, and into my kitchen carrying a folder thick enough to change a life. Inside was a mortgage application for a $700,000 house with my name printed on the borrower line. I never agreed to it. I never even knew about it. So I looked my son in the eye and said one word. No. That single word turned my own child into my enemy. He and his wife filed a lawsuit claiming I was mentally unfit and a danger to myself. But when we finally stood in a courtroom, one quiet clause my late husband wrote 30 years ago stripped their entire case down to the truth. My name is Eleanor Prescott. I am 69 years old. Thank you for being here with me today. Before my story unfolds, let me know where you are watching from by leaving a comment. It truly means more than you know. And a quick note before we continue. Certain parts of this story have been adapted to enhance storytelling and educational value. Any resemblance to real individuals or situations is coincidental. But the heart of this story is entirely real. The azaleas along my back fence needed cutting. They had gotten leggy over the summer, stretching out in every direction without purpose. All growth and no structure. I know a thing or two about that. I spent 40 years as a botanist, studying how plants grow, why some thrive in drought while others wilt at the first sign of trouble. It teaches you patience. It teaches you to watch and wait. And it teaches you to recognize when something is growing wrong. I was on my knees in the cool October dirt, my gardening shears working through a stubborn branch, when the back gate swung open. No knock, no call ahead. In my house, only one person still does that. We are here. Jocelyn's voice cut through the quiet morning like a bird alarm call, the kind that sends every other creature running for cover. She swept into my garden in a cloud of perfume and bright colors, her heels sinking into the soft earth she had never once respected. Behind her, my son Marcus followed. He was 43 years old, and he walked like a man carrying something he could not put down. Jocelyn was holding a bottle of champagne. It was expensive. I could tell by the foil and the French name I would never bother to pronounce. "A little something for you, Eleanor," she sang, holding it out like a trophy. I looked at the bottle. $80 easy. Maybe more. You know I do not drink, Jocelyn. Oh, silly me, she laughed. That bright, brittle sound that always made the muscles in my jaw tighten. I keep forgetting. Thomas was the wine lover. Was he not? Well, you can save it for company. Company. As if I had any. Since Thomas passed 6 years ago, this house had been quiet. Jocelyn knew that. This was not a gift. I have spent my career identifying organisms that disguise themselves, parasitic plants that look like flowers but wrap around a host and drain it dry. Dodder vine, mistletoe. Jocelyn reminded me of a dodder vine, beautiful on the surface, deadly underneath. And the champagne was her tendril. Reaching out, testing the host, Marcus finally spoke. He always waited for Jocelyn to set the stage before he entered. "How is the garden, Mom?" "It will survive," I said, not looking up from the azalea I was pruning. I did not want to look at them. Their visits were never just visits. They were campaigns. "That is good," Jocelyn chimed in, stepping between me and my work, physically blocking my view of the bush I was trimming. "Because we have incredible news. Life-changing news." I put my shears down. I knew this tone. Life-changing was Jocelyn's language for expensive, and incredible meant she wanted something large enough to require a performance. I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees. My back ached. It always does in October when the cold starts settling into the mountains. I pulled off my gardening gloves and looked at them. "Really?" I said. "Let us go inside then." We sat at the kitchen table. My kitchen. The window above the sink looked out over the garden, and through it I could see the magnolia, its leaves just beginning to turn gold. Thomas had planted that tree the week we moved in. 41 years ago. He had dug the hole himself, lowered the root ball in with his bare hands, and packed the soil around it like he was tucking in a child. "That tree will outlive both of us, Ellie," he had said, grinning with dirt on his face. And he had been right. It outlived him. It was still growing, still strong, still rooted. Jocelyn reached into her designer handbag, a thing that probably cost more than my monthly pension, and pulled out a thick, professionally bound folder. She slid it across my kitchen table with the confidence of a woman presenting a contract she had already decided I would sign. "We found it, Eleanor," she said, her eyes wide with rehearsed joy. "The perfect property." She opened the folder and spread glossy photographs across my table. A farmhouse estate up in Biltmore Forest, 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, guest cottage. She was pointing at each photo with a manicured nail, narrating a dream I had never agreed to share. "It is gorgeous," she breathed. "It is everything we have been working toward." I looked at the pictures. I am a woman who has spent her life studying root systems, the hidden architecture beneath the surface that determines whether a plant stands or falls. And this house, this glossy, overpriced estate, it was all canopy, all show, no roots. It looked expensive and fragile, the kind of place that impresses strangers but cannot survive the first real storm. "Sounds expensive," I said quietly, folding my hands on the table. "It is an investment, Mom," Marcus said quickly, stepping into his rehearsed line. "A place for the future, for grandchildren eventually." I looked at my son, married 10 years. No grandchildren, just a lot of talk about building their brand and living their best life. Their best life always seemed to require someone else's money. I reached for the folder. I pulled my reading glasses from the chain around my neck, wiped a smudge from the lens, and put them on. I expected a loan request, a cosigner application, something I could politely decline over a cup of tea and send them on their way. What I saw stopped my breath. It was not a cosigner form. It was a full mortgage application. $700,000. I turned the page. My fingers, still stained with garden soil, stopped over the applicant field. The name typed neatly in the box labeled primary borrower was not Marcus Prescott. It was not Jocelyn Prescott. It was mine, Eleanor Ann Prescott. I took off my glasses. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. I put them back on. The name was still there. They were not asking me to help them buy a house. They were asking me to buy it for them. The kitchen suddenly felt small. The ticking of the clock on the wall, the one Thomas bought at an antique shop in Asheville 30 years ago, sounded like something counting down. I looked up. Jocelyn was smiling, that bright, hard smile that never quite reached her eyes. I stared at the number. $700,000. I am a scientist. Numbers do not lie. My house was paid off. Thomas and I made the last mortgage payment in 1998. I remembered the evening. He opened a bottle of wine, the cheap kind we actually liked. And we sat on the back porch watching fireflies and feeling free. I had not carried a debt since. I lived on my pension and my retirement savings. It was enough. It was comfortable, but it was not $700,000 comfortable. I did the math the way I do everything. Methodically. A 30-year mortgage at my age meant I would be 99 years old when it was paid off. Thomas did not make it to 72. My own mother did not make it to 80. And these two people sitting at my kitchen table were asking me to sign a document that would outlive me by decades. I looked past Jocelyn's bright face, past Marcus's fidgeting hands, and out the window at the magnolia. Its branches were steady. Its roots went deep. It had survived ice storms and drought and the heaviest grief this house had ever known. I needed to be that tree. "I do not understand," I said. My voice came out flat. "Dangerous." Marcus started pacing, that nervous shuffle he does when he is cornered. "Mom, it is just a formality. The bank likes your credit profile better. You are stable, retired. Your house is paid off." Jocelyn cut him off. The sweet voice vanished, replaced by something harder. "Eleanor, let us be adults here." She leaned forward. "All business. You are 69. You are set. Thomas is gone. You live alone in this house." She looked around my kitchen with an expression that made it look like a storage unit. "You have saved enough," she continued, her voice like small, sharp stones on glass. "What is the point of all that saving if you do not use it? It is time to invest in us." Invest. Thomas and I had invested. We invested 41 years in this community. We invested in raising the boy now, avoiding my eyes. We invested by living below our means, not beyond them. I looked at the application again. They were not asking for an investment. They were asking for my entire financial future. The security Thomas and I had built so that I would never become a burden. The irony pressed on my chest like a stone. I looked at my son. "Marcus, look at me." He stopped pacing. His eyes lifted from the floor. Thomas's eyes. Brown and deep, and once full of promise, now filled with a desperate pleading I recognized. The same look at 12 when he broke the Hendersons' mailbox. The same look at 22 when he wrecked his father's car. The look of a boy who knew he was wrong but hoped someone else would fix it. "Did you read this?" I tapped the application. We, Jocelyn, thinks. I am not asking what Jocelyn thinks. My voice was low, but it cut through the room. I am asking you. You are 43 years old. Do you think it is acceptable to ask your mother to sign away her security for a house you cannot afford? She just really wants this house." He whispered. "You do not know the pressure." There it was. The final terrible truth. My son was gone. The man I raised with Thomas had been replaced by this hollowed-out version. He was willing to sacrifice his mother for his wife's ambition. I had seen this in the field. A host plant slowly drained by a parasite until nothing remained but a dry shell. The parasite never thinks it is killing the host. It just thinks it is eating. I folded the application in half. The sound was crisp and final, like a branch snapping clean. I slid it across the table. It stopped in front of Jocelyn. No, the word hung in the air. The faucet dripped. The clock ticked. Jocelyn's face went through 3 changes in 2 seconds. Confusion, as if the word no were a species she had never encountered. A flinch, as if I had struck her. Then a cold fury that turned her eyes into something I recognized from fieldwork. The flat stare of a predator reassessing its approach. "What did you just say?" Her whisper was tight as wire. I said no. Marcus looked like the ground had opened beneath him. "Mom, please." "We already put down a deposit. We told the realtor you were on board." "A deposit? With what money?" "Then you had better call that realtor," I said, standing up. "Tell him you lied. You selfish old woman." The mask shattered. Sweetness, charm, performance, all of it fell away like dead petals. "You are sitting on everything Thomas left and letting it rot. We are your family, Eleanor. A family does not ask its mother to sign her own financial death warrant," I said. I walked to the back door and opened it. October air rushed in, sharp and clean. "Get out of my house." Marcus grabbed Jocelyn's arm. She yanked free. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You will regret this, Eleanor. This is not over." "I am sure it is not," I said, holding the door. They stormed out. The screen door slammed. Tires spun on gravel. The sound of the engine faded into the mountains until the only thing left was wind in the pines. I picked up the champagne bottle. $80 of French bubbles meant to soften me up. I carried it to the garden, stood before the magnolia, and poured every drop onto the roots. The wine soaked into the dark earth and vanished. I sat down on the porch swing Thomas hung the year we moved in. The chains creaked. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, from adrenaline. And from the cold certainty that Jocelyn was right about one thing. This was not over. It was just the beginning. I sat there until the sun dropped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains and the garden went dark. The magnolia was just a shadow now, but I could feel it. Still standing, still rooted. I whispered into the dark. "They came for us, Thomas." The branches moved in the wind. It sounded almost like breathing. The house was quiet for 2 days. Not the kind of quiet I had grown used to since Thomas passed. That was a gentle silence. The silence of a home that remembers laughter and holds it in the walls like warmth. This was different. This was the kind of quiet that settles over a garden right before a killing frost. The air goes still. The insects stop singing. Everything holds its breath because something cold is coming. I called Marcus on Wednesday afternoon. It went straight to voicemail. His recorded greeting sounded cheerful, professional. A voice from a version of my son that may never have existed. "Marcus, it is your mother. We need to talk." I hung up. He did not call back. I called again Thursday morning. Voicemail. This time, I did not leave a message. "I am a 69-year-old woman. I have buried a husband. I have walked through grief. So heavy. It bent me double. I will not beg my own son to answer his phone." Part of me, the mother part, tried to find an excuse. "He is embarrassed," I told myself, while watering the ferns on the back porch. "He is ashamed. He is sitting in that house getting an earful from Jocelyn, and he does not know how to face me." I told myself they needed time. Time to cool off. Time to realize how insane their proposition had been. I tried to believe that the boy I raised, the child Thomas and I had poured our lives into, would come to his senses. I tried to believe that blood was thicker than his wife's ambition. I kept to my routine because routine is what holds me together. I watered the garden at dawn the way Thomas taught me. Early, before the sun gets high. So the roots have time to drink before the heat comes. I fed the birds. I made my coffee in the old percolator Thomas refused to replace. I sat on the porch and watched the mountains change color as the morning light climbed over them. And I talked to the magnolia. I know how that sounds, but I have been talking to plants my entire career. 40 years in laboratories and research stations, narrating observations to specimens that could not answer back. It is habit. It is comfort. After Thomas died, the magnolia became the place I put the words I had nowhere else to send. "Good morning, old friend," I would say, resting my hand against the bark. "Your leaves are turning early this year." Thomas would have noticed. It was not madness. It was memory. It was the only way I knew to keep him close. Thomas used to water the garden at night. I would find him out there in the dark, with the hose, barefoot in the grass, talking to the rosemary and the tomatoes, as if they were old friends. "Plants listen better than people, Ellie," he would say, grinning at me through the screen door. "They never interrupt." I smiled at the memory. It was a small warmth in a cold week. Friday morning came gray and damp. The Blue Ridge Mountains were hidden behind a low ceiling of cloud, and the air smelled like rain and fallen leaves. My joints always ache in this weather. I pulled on Thomas's old flannel jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of him if I buried my nose in the collar, and walked down the gravel driveway to the mailbox. The metal door creaked open. Junk mail. An advertisement for gutter cleaning. The local paper. And one envelope that did not belong. It was from Wells Fargo. My heart tightened. I had not banked with Wells Fargo in my life. Thomas and I kept our accounts at the local credit union, the same one we had opened together 40 years ago. I tore the envelope open right there at the end of my driveway, the cold October air numbing my fingers. It was a form letter. Cold. Impersonal. Corporate. Dear Eleanor Prescott, we regret to inform you that we are unable to approve your application at this time. Application. I had not applied for anything. I read further. Your recent application for a $25,000 home equity line of credit has been declined due to insufficient income verification and recent unusual activity on your credit profile. $25,000. A line of credit against my house. The house Thomas and I paid off 27 years ago. The house I was standing in front of right now, with a letter telling me someone had tried to borrow against it without my knowledge. My hand started to shake. I read the critical line again. Application submitted online. Tuesday, October 15th, 8:17 p.m. Tuesday, 8:17 in the evening. I did the math. They had stormed out of my kitchen at approximately 4:30 that afternoon. Tires on gravel, engine roaring, Jocelyn's voice still ringing in the air. You will regret this. Less than 4 hours later, someone sat down at a computer and filed a fraudulent loan application in my name. They had not even waited for the dust to settle on my driveway. They had not paused to reconsider. They had not felt a single moment of shame. They had driven straight home and tried to steal from me. The rage from Tuesday came flooding back, 10 times stronger. This was not a family disagreement. This was not a spoiled daughter-in-law throwing a tantrum. This was calculated. This was deliberate. This was a crime. I crumpled the letter in my fist. I stood at the end of my driveway, the empty road stretching out in both directions, the mountains hidden in cloud, and I understood something that changed everything. I was not dealing with a disappointed son and his greedy wife. I was dealing with criminals, and they had already made their next move. I did not go back inside. I stood right there at the end of my driveway, the damp mountain air pressing against my skin, and I went through the rest of the mail with hands that would not stop shaking. The junk went into a pile under my arm, the local paper I tucked against my chest. And then I found the second envelope. It was from the Internal Revenue Service. I have paid my taxes on time every year for 47 years. A letter from the IRS does not frighten me. But this one was not about taxes. It was a notification. A formal acknowledgement of a new bank account opened under my name and social security number at a regional branch of SunTrust, now Truist, in Asheville. An account I had never opened, an account I had never authorized, an account I did not know existed until this very moment. 2 letters, 2 different institutions, both telling me that someone had used my identity to create financial instruments I knew nothing about. The Wells Fargo rejection was bad enough. But this was something else, entirely. This was not just an attempt. Someone had successfully opened a bank account in my name, which meant someone had my social security number, my date of birth, and enough personal information to pass a verification process. I walked back up the driveway. My feet moved on their own. I went straight to the kitchen, dropped the mail on the table, and picked up the phone. I dialed the fraud department number on the Wells Fargo letter. I punched through the automated menu the way you prune dead wood, without patience and without mercy, jabbing 0 until a human voice finally answered. Fraud department. This is Daniel. How can I help you? My name is Eleanor Prescott, I said. My voice was steady, dangerously steady. I am holding a rejection letter for a $25,000 line of credit that I never applied for. I need to know exactly what information was used to submit this application. He typed. I waited. The silence on the line was filled with the ticking of Thomas's clock and my own heartbeat. Okay, Mrs. Prescott. The application was submitted online at 8:17 p.m. on Tuesday, October 15th. It used your correct full name, Eleanor Ann Prescott, your correct date of birth, and your correct social security number. I closed my eyes. And the security verification? I asked. What did they use? There was a pause. More typing. The applicant correctly provided the answer to your security question. Mother's maiden name. I gripped the phone. What answer did they give? Another pause. Whitaker, he said. Elizabeth Whitaker. The kitchen went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens inside your body when the world stops making sense. Whitaker. Elizabeth Whitaker. My mother's name. My mother, who came to this country from England at 19 years old, who raised 4 children on a teacher's salary, who died in her sleep 30 years ago, in a small house in Virginia that smelled like lavender and old books. Her name, her maiden name, used like a crowbar to break into my life. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I did not thank Daniel. I just stood there in my kitchen, the receiver heavy in my financial documents are in a fireproof safe in Thomas's study. I am not a careless woman. You do not find a mother's maiden name on a piece of junk mail. It is not written on a utility bill. It is not something you stumble across while rifling through a desk drawer. It is something you know, someone told them. And I knew, with a certainty that settled in my stomach like cold earth, that only one person could have. Marcus. The memory came not from last week but from 6 years ago. Right after Thomas died, I was a ghost walking through this house without seeing it. The grief was a fog I could not find my way out of. Marcus had come home. He had sat at this kitchen table, this very table, and offered to help with the paperwork, the life insurance, the death certificate, the tax forms. Mom, this one needs your mother's maiden name. I was so broken, so hollowed out by loss, that I did not even hesitate. Whitaker, I had said. Elizabeth Whitaker. He had written it down. Got it, Mom. Do not worry. I will handle everything. He handled it. He took that name, that piece of my history given to him in my darkest hour, and he kept it. He kept it for 6 years. Not like a memory, like a tool, like a seed buried in dark soil, waiting for the right season to germinate into something poisonous. But the maiden name was only half the truth. There was still the IRS letter, the ghost account. I picked up the phone again and called Truist. Another automated maze, another human voice at the end of it, another careful recitation of my social security number, which now felt like handing someone the key to my house while they were already inside. The account was real. It had been opened on Tuesday, October 15th. The same day. And there was a balance. Or rather, there had been. $15,000 had been deposited into the account and immediately withdrawn. A cashier's check, the representative said, made out to Blue Ridge Premium Properties. The deposit on the house. $15,000. My money. Taken from the joint savings account I had opened for Marcus when he was 18 years old. An account I had forgotten existed. An account he clearly had not. They had not just tried to use my name. They had already taken my money. $15,000 of real money, earned and saved and set aside over decades. Gone. Funneled through a ghost account I never opened into a deposit on a house I never agreed to buy. In my career, I studied parasites, organisms that attach themselves to a host and feed on it, while giving nothing back. Dodder vine, broom rape, rafflesia. They are not evil. They are simply built to consume, but they kill the host just the same. My son had become a parasite, and his wife had taught him where to bite. I needed to know how deep the damage went. I needed to know what else they had taken from Thomas's study. And I needed the one person on my street who never misses anything, the one person whose eyes are sharper than mine. I put down the phone. I walked out the back door, across the wet grass, and straight to the low wooden fence that separates my yard from hers. Lucille, I called out. My voice was rough. I need your help. Lucille Washington's front porch had always smelled like lemon verbena and black tea. For 6 years, ever since Thomas passed, that porch had been my second living room. We would sit there on Sunday mornings with our cups and our silence, watching cardinals land on the fence post between our yards. But that Saturday afternoon, I did not walk across the grass for tea. I walked across because I was frightened, and Lucille was the only person I trusted enough to let see it. She opened the screen door before I knocked. She always could read trouble on a face, the way I could read drought on a leaf. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same low bun she had worn in every photograph from her 31 years on the Buncombe County Family Court bench. She looked at me for 2 seconds, then stepped aside and said, "Come in, Ellie. I'll put the kettle on." I sat at her kitchen table, the same oak table where she had written hundreds of rulings after hours because the courthouse fluorescent lights gave her migraines. I placed 3 documents in front of her: the Wells Fargo denial letter, the IRS notice about the Truist account, and the printout showing the $15,000 withdrawal from my joint savings. I arranged them in chronological order, because that is how evidence works, and because I needed someone who understood evidence to tell me I was not overreacting. Lucille put on her glasses. She read each page without speaking. She turned the Wells Fargo letter over to check the back, a habit from decades of reading legal filings. When she finished, she removed her glasses, set them on the table, and folded her hands the way she used to fold them before delivering a verdict. "How long have you known?" she asked. 4 days. "Since the Wells Fargo letter arrived, and you have not called the police." It was not a question. It was a diagnosis. "He is my son, Lucille." She nodded. Not in agreement. In recognition. She had heard those 5 words 1,000 times in her courtroom, spoken by parents whose children had stolen their medication, forged their checks, sold their jewelry. She told me once that the most dangerous sentence in family law was not a threat or a lie. It was, "But he is my child," because it turned victims into volunteers. "Ellie, I need you to listen to me the way you would listen if I were still sitting behind a bench and you were in a witness chair." She waited until I met her eyes. "What your son and his wife have done is not a family disagreement. Submitting a mortgage application using your name and social security number without your knowledge is fraud. Opening a bank account in your name is identity theft. Withdrawing $15,000 from your joint savings to fund a transaction you did not authorize is theft. These are felonies in the state of North Carolina. Every single one." The kettle started to hiss. I had known intellectually that what Marcus and Jocelyn had done was criminal, but hearing the word felonies spoken by a woman who had spent 3 decades sentencing people for exactly these offenses made something shift inside my chest. It was the difference between reading about frost damage in a textbook and walking into your greenhouse at dawn to find every seedling dead. "What do I do?" I asked. Lucille held up 3 fingers. "First, you file a police report. Today, you go to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office on Haywood Street and you file it in person. Second, you call all 3 credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. You freeze your credit immediately. If they have your social security number and your mother's maiden name, they can open more accounts every day you wait." She paused. "Third, you call Patricia Yamamoto." I had heard the name before. Lucille had mentioned her over the years, always with the particular respect she reserved for people who had earned it in her courtroom rather than demanded it. Patricia is an elder law attorney. She has practiced in Asheville for 22 years. Guardianship disputes, financial exploitation, estate protection. Lucille leaned forward. "I presided over a case," she argued, in 2017. A son petitioned to have his mother declared incompetent so he could access her retirement accounts. He brought a doctor who had examined the mother for 11 minutes. Patricia dismantled every piece of evidence in 2 days. The petition was denied. The son was referred for criminal prosecution. She let the silence do its work. That is who you want in your corner. "Lucille, I do not want to hire a lawyer against my own son. I know you don't. But your son has already hired the situation against you. He simply has not filed the paperwork yet." I stared at the documents on her table. Every piece of paper was a seed Marcus and Jocelyn had planted while I was not looking. And every seed was designed to grow into something that could strangle me. "You think they will try for guardianship?" I said. "If they have already committed fraud and identity theft, and you have now blocked those channels, the next logical step is to remove you from the equation entirely. Guardianship gives them legal control over your money, your property, your medical decisions, everything. She watched me carefully. Does that sound like something Jocelyn would think of? Jocelyn, who had worked in commercial lending for 9 years. Jocelyn, who understood loan structures, the way I understood root systems. Jocelyn, who had smiled at me across my own kitchen table while a $700,000 mortgage application sat inside her folder like a coiled snake. Yes, that sounded exactly like something Jocelyn would think of. Lucille wrote Patricia Yamamoto's number on a piece of notepaper. Call her Monday morning. Tell her everything. Bring the documents. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket, next to the reading glasses Thomas had given me the Christmas before he died. Lucille walked me to her porch and stood there while I crossed the yard. Watching not because she doubted I could walk 30 feet, but because that is what you do when someone you care about is walking into a storm. Inside my house, I stopped at the doorway to Thomas's study. His walnut partner's desk. His drafting lamp. The photograph of us standing in front of the Magnolia the day we moved in. I had kept the room exactly as he left it for 6 years, but now I needed it for something he would have understood. I needed a place to organize a fight. I turned on the lamp. I sat in his chair, and I picked up the phone to begin. Monday morning came the way November arrives in the mountains, quiet and sharp, with a cold that pressed against the windows before sunrise. I had not slept well. I had spent most of Sunday sitting at Thomas's desk, sorting through the filing cabinet he had organized with the same precision he brought to everything. Each folder labeled in his careful block print, each document filed by year and category. Thomas believed that a well-kept record was a form of respect, respect for the truth, respect for the future, respect for whoever might need to understand what happened and when. I had always teased him about it. Now, I understood. Patricia Yamamoto answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need volume to command a room. I told her Lucille Washington had given me her number. She said she knew Lucille well and asked me to describe my situation from the beginning, in my own words, without worrying about legal terminology. So I did. I started with the garden gate, the champagne, the mortgage application. I told her about the Wells Fargo denial letter, the Truist account, the $15,000 withdrawn via a cashier's check to Blue Ridge Premium Properties. I told her about Marcus obtaining my mother's maiden name 6 years ago, after Thomas's funeral, when I was too grief-hollowed to question why he needed it. I told her everything in the order it happened, because Lucille had taught me that chronology is the skeleton of any case. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, the line was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Mrs. Prescott, can you come to my office this afternoon? Bring every document you have. Originals, not copies." Her office was on Patton Avenue, above a bookstore that sold used paperbacks and smelled like old ink. The staircase was narrow, and the waiting room was small, just 4 chairs and a fern that needed repotting. But the office itself was meticulous. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with North Carolina statutes, case reporters, and binders labeled by year. Patricia sat behind a glass-topped desk, with nothing on it except a legal pad, a pen, and a ceramic cup holding green tea. She was perhaps 60, with short black hair streaked with white, and reading glasses that she wore on a plain cord rather than a decorative chain. She did not smile when she greeted me, but her handshake was firm and her eyes were steady, and I trusted her immediately for the same reason I trusted certain plants. She looked like she had weathered seasons and grown stronger for it. I laid the documents on her desk in the same chronological order I had arranged them for Lucille. Patricia examined each one with the slow thoroughness of someone reading soil composition results, turning pages, checking dates, cross-referencing details. She wrote notes on her legal pad in handwriting so small I could not read it from across the desk. When she reached the Truist account printout, she paused. "The cashier's check was made out to Blue Ridge Premium Properties," she said. "That is a real estate holding company. Do you know who owns it?" "No," She wrote something down. I will find out. If your son and his wife use stolen funds as a deposit on a property through a specific company, there is a paper trail, and paper trails do not lie no matter how many people do. She set down her pen and looked at me directly. Mrs. Prescott, I want to be honest with you about what I believe is coming. Based on the pattern of behavior you have described, your son and daughter-in-law are not finished. They have attempted to secure a mortgage in your name. That failed because you discovered it. They applied for a home equity line of credit. That failed because Wells Fargo flagged it. They opened a fraudulent bank account and stole $15,000. That succeeded, but you have now identified it. Every conventional financial channel they have tried is closing. The next step, and I have seen this dozens of times in my career, is a guardianship petition. The word landed the same way it had when Lucille said it. Heavy. Final. Like the sound a greenhouse door makes when the latch catches in a storm. They will file a petition in Buncombe County Superior Court claiming that you are mentally incapacitated and unable to manage your own financial affairs. Patricia continued. They will present themselves as concerned family members acting in your best interest. They may produce a medical evaluation, possibly from a physician you have never met or one who examined you briefly. If the court grants guardianship, your son or his wife would gain legal authority over your bank accounts, your property, your investments, and your medical decisions. Everything, I said. Everything. I looked at the fern on her windowsill. It was a Boston fern, Nephrolepis exaltata, one of the most resilient species in cultivation. It can survive drought, low light, and neglect, but it cannot survive having its roots cut. That is the one thing from which no fern recovers. And that was exactly what Marcus and Jocelyn were trying to do to me. Cut the roots. What do we do? I asked. Patricia picked up her pen again. We prepare. Before they file, we build a record so thorough that their petition collapses under its own weight. First, I need you to schedule a full cognitive evaluation with a board-certified geriatric neuropsychologist. Not your family doctor. Not a general practitioner. Someone whose credentials cannot be questioned. Second, I am going to subpoena your son's financial records, employment history, bank statements, tax returns, credit reports. If he is in financial distress, that establishes motive. She paused. Third, I need to know about your estate, your assets, everything you own, everything Thomas left, every account, every policy, every trust. The word trust sat between us like a stone dropped into still water. I had not told Lucille about the trust. I had not told anyone about the trust. Because Thomas and I had agreed, 30 years ago, that the trust would remain private until it needed to become a shield. Thomas was the one who had chosen that word. Not an inheritance, not a gift, a shield. There is a trust, I said. The Prescott Thomas Botanical Research Trust. My late husband and I established it in 1994. Patricia waited. It is currently valued at approximately $50 million. Her pen stopped. She looked at me over her reading glasses, and for the first time since I had walked into her office, her expression changed. It was not surprise exactly. It was recalibration. The way a compass needle swings when it discovers north is not where it expected. 50 million, she repeated. 50 million. Derived from a drought-resistant cultivar patent Thomas and I developed together. The royalties accumulated over 3 decades. Patricia set her pen down very carefully. Mrs. Prescott, does your son know about this trust? No. No one does except the trustee, my attorney of record, and now you. She nodded slowly. Then she picked up her pen and wrote one sentence on her legal pad. She turned the pad so I could read it. The sentence said, "This changes everything." I looked at the Boston fern again. Its fronds were a little dry at the tips, but its roots, I could tell, were deep and strong and very much alive. Yes, I said. I suppose it does. Patricia did not speak for nearly a full minute after I told her the number. I watched her the way I used to watch a grafting site in the first days after joining 2 branches, looking for signs of rejection, swelling, discoloration, any indication that the union would fail. But Patricia was not rejecting the information. She was absorbing it, reorganizing every assumption she had made about my case around a new center of gravity, the way a solar system rearranges itself when you discover there is a second sun. "Tell me about the trust," she said. "Everything. Structure, terms, beneficiaries, conditions." I folded my hands on her glass-topped desk and began where Thomas and I had begun in 1994, the year the first patent was granted. Thomas and I had spent 11 years developing a drought-resistant cultivar of Zea maize, a corn variety that could maintain yield in conditions that would destroy conventional strains. The research started in our greenhouse, then moved to a university partnership, then to a licensing agreement with an agricultural conglomerate that paid royalties on every acre planted. By 1994, the annual royalties had exceeded $2 million, and Thomas sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus and Jocelyn would one day place a mortgage application, and said we needed to protect what we had built. Not for ourselves, for the work, for the future of the research, and for whatever family might come after us. We hired an estate attorney in Charlotte, a man named David Chen, who specialized in irrevocable trusts for intellectual property holders. David structured the Prescott Thomas Botanical Research Trust as an irrevocable trust with 2 classes of beneficiaries. The primary beneficiaries were Thomas and me during our lifetimes. Upon the death of both trustees, the secondary beneficiaries would be our descendants, beginning with Marcus and any future grandchildren. The trust held the patent rights, the accumulated royalties, a diversified investment portfolio managed by a fiduciary in Raleigh, and the deed to a 40-acre research parcel in Henderson County that Thomas and I had purchased in 1997. Patricia took notes steadily. "Who is the current trustee?" "David Chen retired in 2018. His successor is a partner at the same firm, a woman named Sandra Liu. She manages the trust, according to the original terms. And the current value you mentioned? $50 million. Is that the corpus? The total assets?" "Approximately. The last valuation Sandra provided was $48.7 million as of December last year. The royalties alone generate roughly $1.4 million annually, reinvested into the portfolio." Patricia wrote the figures carefully. Then she looked up. "You said there are conditions for the secondary beneficiaries. What kind of conditions?" This was the part Thomas had insisted on. The part that had caused the only real argument we ever had about money. "I wanted the trust to pass to Marcus unconditionally because he was our son, and I believed that love should not come with terms." Thomas disagreed. Thomas said that money without structure was like water without a channel. It would flood, erode, and destroy the very ground it was meant to nourish. Thomas called it the root clause, I said. Patricia's pen stopped. The root clause is a provision in the trust document that governs how secondary beneficiaries qualify for distributions. It states that any descendant seeking access to trust funds must demonstrate, through independent verification, 3 things. I held up 3 fingers the way Lucille had held up hers 2 days earlier. First, financial responsibility. No outstanding judgments, no bankruptcies, no unresolved debts exceeding $10,000 in the preceding 5 years. Second, ethical conduct. No felony convictions, no pending criminal charges, and no civil findings of fraud, exploitation, or abuse against any family member. Third, good faith engagement. The beneficiary must not have attempted to access the trust through coercion, manipulation, deception, or legal action designed to circumvent the grantor's wishes. I lowered my hand. If a beneficiary fails any of the 3 conditions, the trustee is authorized to suspend their distributions permanently. The funds are redirected to the trust's charitable purpose, which is funding botanical research scholarships at land-grant universities. Patricia set her pen down. She leaned back in her chair and pressed her fingertips together. And I recognized the gesture, because Lucille did the same thing when she was weighing something that mattered. Your husband wrote a clause that essentially says if your son tries to steal from you, he loses everything. Thomas did not write it to punish Marcus, I said. He wrote it to protect the work, to ensure that whoever inherited the trust would be someone worthy of continuing what we built. I paused. But yes, if Marcus has committed fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation against me, he has violated all three conditions of the root clause. Every single one. The afternoon light was shifting through Patricia's window, catching the dry tips of the Boston fern and turning them copper. I thought about the day Thomas and I had signed the trust documents in David Chen's office in Charlotte. Marcus was 13 years old. He was at home with a babysitter, playing video games, and he had no idea that his parents were sitting in a law office deciding the architecture of his future. Thomas had held my hand under the table while we signed, and afterward, in the parking lot, he had said something I never forgot. Money doesn't create character, Ellie. It only reveals the roots, or the rot. I repeated those words to Patricia now. She wrote them down on her legal pad. May I use that phrase in court? If it comes to it. Thomas would have wanted you to. Patricia stood and walked to her bookshelf. She pulled down a thick binder and opened it to a section tabbed in red. Mrs. Prescott, I need to contact Sandra Liu and obtain a certified copy of the trust document, including the root clause, within the next 72 hours. I also need the most recent trust valuation, the patent licensing agreements, and the trust's distribution history. If your son files a guardianship petition, and I believe he will, the existence of a $50 million trust changes the stakes beyond anything a routine guardianship case involves. The court will scrutinize every motive, every action, every dollar. That is what I want, I said. You understand that once the trust becomes part of the record, it becomes known. Your son will learn about it. His wife will learn about it. The amount will be stated in open court. I looked at the fern one more time. Its fronds reached toward the window, the way all living things reach toward light. Not because they choose to, but because it is in their nature. Thomas had kept the trust secret for 30 years to protect it. Now the secret itself had become the weapon. Let them learn, I said. Let them see exactly what they lost. Patricia closed the binder. Then we prepare for court. I drove home through the mountain roads with the windows down, the November air sharp against my face. The Blue Ridge was turning the color of old copper, the oaks dropping their last leaves, the ridgelines bare and honest against the sky. When I pulled into my driveway, the magnolia stood where it had always stood, its branches wide and dark and patient. I placed my hand on its trunk the way I had done 1,000 times before. They are going to learn about the trust, Thomas, I whispered. And then they are going to learn what it costs to forget where you came from. The petition arrived on a Thursday, 11 days after Marcus and Jocelyn had walked through my garden gate with champagne and a mortgage application. A process server brought it. He was a young man, maybe 25, with an apologetic expression and a clipboard. He asked if I was Eleanor Ruth Prescott. I said I was. He handed me a manila envelope, asked me to sign confirming receipt, and left without another word. He had the look of someone who had done this enough times to know that nothing good ever came inside those envelopes. I carried it to Thomas's desk. I turned on the drafting lamp, and I read every word. The document was titled Petition for Adjudication of Incompetency and Appointment of Guardian, and it had been filed in the Buncombe County Superior Court by an attorney named Garrett Webb on behalf of Marcus David Prescott and Jocelyn Ann Prescott. The petition stated that Eleanor Ruth Prescott, age 69, residing alone at 14 Magnolia Lane, Asheville, North Carolina, was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage her own financial affairs. It requested that the court appoint Marcus David Prescott as guardian of her person and estate, with full authority over all financial accounts, real property, and medical decisions. I read those words twice. Then I read them a third time, because I wanted to be certain I understood exactly what my son was asking a judge to do. He was asking a judge to erase me, not from existence, but from authority, from the right to decide where my money went, where I lived, whether I could sell my own house, or buy my own groceries, or choose my own doctor. He was asking a court to reduce his mother to a legal child and to hand himself the key. The petition contained 4 supporting exhibits. The first was a letter from a physician named Dr. Raymond Shelton, who described himself as a board-certified geriatric specialist practicing in Hendersonville. The letter stated that he had evaluated Eleanor Prescott on October 16th at the request of her family and concluded that she exhibited signs of moderate cognitive decline, including confusion about financial matters, difficulty with short-term memory, and impaired judgment regarding personal safety. The evaluation, according to the letter, had lasted approximately 45 minutes. I had never met Dr. Raymond Shelton. I had never been to Hendersonville for a medical appointment. October 16th was the day after Marcus and Jocelyn had submitted the fraudulent HELOC application. The day after they had opened the fake Truist account. The day after they had stolen $15,000 from my savings. While I was sitting in my kitchen discovering that my own son had forged my name on a loan application, a doctor I had never seen was apparently writing a letter declaring me incompetent. The second exhibit was a sworn affidavit from Jocelyn. She stated that over the past 6 months, she had observed her mother-in-law exhibiting erratic behavior, including forgetting recent conversations, leaving the stove unattended, wandering the garden at unusual hours, and expressing paranoid beliefs about family members attempting to steal from her. She described an incident in which Eleanor had accused Marcus and Jocelyn of fraud after they presented her with a legitimate investment opportunity, and stated that Eleanor's reaction was irrational, hostile, and indicative of deteriorating mental function. I set the affidavit down carefully, the way you set down a jar containing something venomous. Every sentence was a lie sculpted to resemble the truth. I had not forgotten conversations. I had refused to have them. I had not left the stove unattended. I had not wandered my garden at unusual hours. I worked in my garden at every hour because that is what botanists do. And the so-called paranoid beliefs about family members stealing from me were not beliefs at all. They were facts, documented by bank records, confirmed by Wells Fargo's fraud department, and sitting in a file on Patricia Yamamoto's desk. The third exhibit was a financial summary claiming that Eleanor Prescott had a monthly pension of approximately $2,600, a retirement account valued at roughly $78,000, and a fully paid residence at 14 Magnolia Lane with an estimated market value of $420,000. The summary listed these as the entirety of my assets. There was no mention of the Prescott Thomas Trust, no mention of $50 million, no mention of royalties, patents, or the Henderson County research parcel. Marcus and Jocelyn were asking for control of what they could see. They had no idea what they could not. The fourth exhibit was a brief statement from Marcus himself. It was only 1 paragraph. He stated that he loved his mother, that he was deeply concerned about her declining health, that he had tried repeatedly to help her manage her finances, but she had refused all assistance, and that he believed guardianship was the only way to protect her from herself. The last sentence read, "I am doing this because I love her, and I cannot watch her destroy everything my father built." I closed the petition. I placed it on Thomas's desk, next to the drafting lamp, and the photograph of the 2 of us, in front of the magnolia. Thomas was smiling in that photograph, his hand on the trunk of the tree he had planted the day we moved in, and his eyes had that expression they always had when he was proud of something that would last longer than he would. Marcus had written that he could not watch me destroy everything his father built. But Thomas had built the trust precisely because he foresaw a moment like this. He had written the root clause not as a punishment but as a diagnostic test, the way a botanist tests soil before planting. If the soil is healthy, the roots grow deep and the plant thrives. If the soil is toxic, nothing takes hold. The root clause was Thomas's way of testing the soil of his own son's character. and Marcus had just failed every single condition. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. She answered on the first ring, as though she had been waiting. "I received the petition," I said. "I know. Garrett Webb's office filed it this morning. I have already obtained a copy from the clerk. There is a doctor's letter. A man named Raymond Shelton. He claims he evaluated me on October 16th. I saw it. We will address Dr. Shelton thoroughly." Her voice was precise and steady, a scalpel rather than a hammer. "Mrs. Prescott, I need you to listen carefully. You have a hearing date, October 28th. That gives us 13 days. In those 13 days, I need 3 things from you. Your cognitive evaluation with the neuropsychologist I referred you to, your complete financial records, including the documents Sandra Lou is sending from the trust, and your patience." "Patience I have," I said. "Thomas taught me that. You cannot rush a root system." "No," Patricia agreed. "But you can make sure it is ready when the storm hits." I hung up the phone and looked at the magnolia through the study window. Its leaves were dark and glossy, even in November. Evergreen, in a season when everything else was surrendering to the cold. 13 days. That was all I had. The poisoning began before I recognized it for what it was. That is the nature of poison. It does not announce itself. It seeps into the soil quietly, molecule by molecule, until the roots absorb it, and the damage is already done. 3 days after the petition was served, Helen Calloway stopped me outside the post office on Haywood Street. Helen was the president of the Asheville Garden Club, a woman I had known for 19 years, a woman who had attended Thomas's funeral and brought a casserole dish of scalloped potatoes that she later asked me to return because it was her grandmother's Pyrex. She was standing by the mailboxes with her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line that I had only ever seen her direct at slugs destroying her hostas. "Eleanor," she said, "I think we need to talk." She told me, in the careful tone of someone delivering news they believed was a kindness, that Jocelyn had called her the previous week. Jocelyn had expressed deep concern about my mental health. She had described episodes of confusion, instances where I had forgotten appointments, moments when I had repeated the same story within minutes of telling it. Jocelyn had wept on the phone, Helen said. She had asked Helen, as someone who saw me regularly at club meetings, to keep an eye on me and to report anything unusual. "I told her I would," Helen said, "because that seemed like the right thing to do." I stood on the sidewalk holding a bundle of mail and felt something shift beneath me, the way soil shifts when water has been running underneath it for weeks and the surface finally gives. Jocelyn was not only building a legal case, she was building a social one. She was reaching into my community, into the network of relationships I had spent decades cultivating, and she was planting doubt in every conversation, every phone call, every tearful plea for help watching poor Eleanor. "Helen," I said, "has Jocelyn called anyone else in the club?" Helen hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She called Margaret and Diane, and I believe she spoke with Pastor Jeffries at First Presbyterian. 4 people. 4 seeds of doubt planted in 4 different patches of soil, each one carefully chosen for maximum spread. Margaret chaired the hospitality committee and talked to everyone. Diane ran the community newsletter. Pastor Jeffries saw me every Sunday and would now be watching me with new eyes, searching for signs of the confusion Jocelyn had described, interpreting every ordinary moment of forgetfulness as evidence of decline. Jocelyn understood something fundamental about small communities. You do not need to convince everyone. You only need to convince the people who talk to everyone. I thanked Helen and walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes with the engine off, watching a mockingbird on the telephone wire, thinking about the precision of what Jocelyn had done. She had not lied outright to Helen. She had expressed concern. She had cried. She had asked for help. Every word she had spoken was designed to sound like love while functioning as sabotage. It was the social equivalent of a parasitic vine, something that wraps itself around a healthy plant and uses the plant's own structure to climb toward the light while slowly strangling the host. That evening I called Patricia and told her about the conversation with Helen. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that surprised me. Good. Mrs. Prescott, what Jocelyn is doing is called witness tampering by narrative. She is attempting to influence potential witnesses and community members before any hearing takes place. If we can document this pattern, it becomes evidence of a coordinated campaign rather than genuine concern. I want you to write down every conversation you have in which someone reports that Jocelyn or Marcus contacted them about your mental health. Date, time, who told you, what they said. Do not confront Jocelyn or Marcus directly. Let them continue. Every call they make is another thread we can pull in court. I hung up and sat at Thomas's desk with a fresh legal pad Patricia had given me. At the top of the first page I wrote Jocelyn's campaign, and underneath I recorded everything Helen had told me. The date, the names, the details about weeping on the phone, about asking people to watch me, about the specific symptoms Jocelyn had described. Then I called Lucille. Lucille answered the way she always did, with my name and nothing else, as though confirming a fact. I told her what Helen had said. Lucille was silent for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice had the particular gravity it carried when she was not speaking as my neighbor, but as a woman who had spent 31 years watching people lie under oath. Eleanor, this is going to get worse before the hearing. Jocelyn is building a community record. When the judge asks whether anyone has observed signs of cognitive decline, she wants 5 or 6 people ready to say yes. They noticed. They were worried. They saw the signs. It does not matter that the signs were manufactured. What matters is that the witnesses believe them. What do? You do exactly what Patricia told you to do. You document everything. And you keep living your life with the same clarity and competence you have always shown. Go to your garden club meeting. Go to church. Talk to your neighbors. Let them see you as you are, not as Jocelyn has described you. The next morning I went to the Asheville Garden Club's monthly meeting at the community center on Cox Avenue. I arrived 10 minutes early, which was my habit. I brought a tray of lemon bars I had baked that morning, which was also my habit. I wore the pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary, a single strand that I wore to every meeting because it was beautiful and because it reminded me that some things gain value simply by lasting. The room was different. I felt it the moment I walked in. Not hostile. Worse. Careful. Margaret greeted me with a hug that lasted 2 seconds longer than usual. Diane asked me 3 times if I needed help carrying the lemon bars, as though a tray of cookies weighed more than my aging arms could manage. Helen watched me from across the room with an expression I recognized because I had studied it in greenhouses for 40 years. It was the look you give a plant when you suspect disease, but have not yet confirmed it. Watchful. Clinical. Already mourning. I set the lemon bars on the refreshment table. I took my seat. I participated in every discussion with the specificity and recall that 40 years of botanical research had trained into me. When the topic turned to the spring planting schedule, I cited the frost date averages for the past decade from memory and recommended a delayed transplant timeline based on soil temperature projections I had calculated the previous week. I saw Helen glance at Margaret. Margaret glanced at Diane. The glances were small, but I caught everyone. They were recalibrating. Comparing the woman Jocelyn had described with the woman sitting in front of them, citing decade-long climate data without notes. The two did not match. And I could see the confusion settling into their faces like sediment in disturbed water. I did not address Jocelyn's calls. I did not defend myself. I simply existed in that room as the person I had always been, and I let the truth do what truth does when given enough time and enough light. It grows. Patricia called me on a Monday morning, 8 days before the hearing. Her voice carried the same controlled precision it always did, but underneath it I detected something new, not alarm. Anticipation. The way a surgeon sounds when she has located the tumor and knows exactly where to cut. "I have Dr. Shelton's records," she said, "and I need you to hear what I found." She had subpoenaed Raymond Shelton's medical files, his billing records, and his appointment calendar for the month of October. What she discovered was not merely suspicious. It was architectural. It was a structure built to look like medicine, but designed to function as a weapon. Dr. Raymond Shelton maintained a private practice in Hendersonville, 40 minutes south of Asheville. He was board-certified in internal medicine, not geriatric psychiatry, not neuropsychology, not any specialty that would qualify him to render a professional opinion on cognitive decline. His website described him as a family physician with a focus on wellness and preventive care. He had no published research on dementia. He had no training in neuropsychological evaluation. He had no affiliation with any memory clinic, university hospital, or Alzheimer's research center. He was, in the language of my profession, an invasive species posing as a native plant. He looked like he belonged, but he had no roots in the soil he claimed to occupy. His appointment calendar for October 16th showed a single entry at 2:15 in the afternoon. The patient name listed was Eleanor Prescott. The appointment type was coded as Comprehensive Cognitive Assessment. The duration was recorded as 45 minutes. His billing record showed that he had invoiced the assessment to an address I did not recognize on Mills River Road, and the invoice had been paid in full by cashier's check 3 days later. The check was drawn on a joint account belonging to Marcus and Jocelyn Prescott. "They paid him," I said. "They paid him before the evaluation was supposedly complete," Patricia corrected. "The invoice was generated on October 16th, the same day as the appointment. The cashier's check was dated October 19th, 3 days later. But the evaluation letter attached to the guardianship petition is dated October 22nd, 6 days after the appointment. Which means Dr. Shelton issued his invoice before he wrote his conclusions. He billed for a diagnosis he had not yet rendered, on a patient he had not yet examined, because he never examined me, because he never examined you." I sat at Thomas's desk and pressed my palm flat against the walnut surface. The wood was cool and smooth, sanded by Thomas's own hands 30 years ago, and it steadied me the way solid ground steadies a person who has just felt the floor tilt. A doctor I had never met had written a letter declaring me mentally incompetent. My son had paid for that letter, and together they had submitted it to a court of law as though it were truth. "There is more," Patricia said. "I pulled Dr. Shelton's involvement in prior guardianship cases in the Western North Carolina district. In the past 4 years, his name appears as the evaluating physician in 7 guardianship petitions. 7. In 5 of those cases, the petitioner's attorney was Garrett Webb. I closed my eyes. 7 families. 7 elderly people who may have been subjected to the same fabricated evaluation, the same manufactured diagnosis, the same assembly line of fraud dressed in a white coat. Shelton and Webb were not strangers who happened to cross paths in a courtroom. They were partners in a system designed to strip vulnerable people of their autonomy and hand it to whoever was willing to pay. "Can you prove that the evaluation never happened?" I asked. "That is why I need your help. I need to establish where you were on October 16th, between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. If you were anywhere other than Dr. Shelton's office in Hendersonville, and if we can prove it." His letter collapses. And when his letter collapses, the medical foundation of the entire petition collapses with it. I opened the calendar I kept on Thomas's desk. It was a paper calendar, the kind with a full page for each day, because Thomas had always kept one, and I had continued the habit. October 16th. I ran my finger down the page and found 3 entries written in my own handwriting. 9:30. Dentist appointment. Dr. Linden. Pack Square. 12:15. Lunch with Lucille. Home. 2:45. Garden Club Steering Committee. Community Center. Cox Avenue. 2:45. The steering committee meeting had started at 2:45. 30 minutes after Shelton's calendar claimed I was sitting in his office in Hendersonville. The community center was 40 minutes north of his practice. I could not have been in both places. And the steering committee meeting had been attended by Helen Calloway, Margaret, Diane, and 4 other members, all of whom could confirm that I was present, coherent, and actively participating in a discussion about the club's annual budget. I was at the Garden Club steering committee meeting, I said. 2:45 to 4:30. 7 witnesses. Patricia exhaled. It was the first time I had heard her release tension, and it sounded like a controlled breath before a decisive incision. 7 witnesses who can testify that you were in Asheville, cognitively sharp, while Dr. Shelton claims you were in his Hendersonville office, exhibiting signs of moderate cognitive decline. What happens to Dr. Shelton? After the hearing, I will file a complaint with the North Carolina Medical Board. Fabricating a patient evaluation is grounds for license revocation. But that comes later. Right now, what matters is October 28th. I looked at the calendar page for October 28th. It was blank. I had not written anything there yet, because I had not known what to write. Now I picked up my pen and wrote 2 words in the same careful block print Thomas had used for everything. Court day, Patricia continued. I also received your neuropsychological evaluation results from Dr. Amara Chen. No relation to David Chen, the trust attorney, a coincidence that had made me smile when Patricia first mentioned the name. Dr. Chen is a board-certified geriatric neuropsychologist at Mission Hospital. She evaluated you over 2 sessions totaling 4 hours. Her report concludes that you demonstrate cognitive function in the 99th percentile for your age group. Memory, executive function, reasoning, language, spatial awareness, all within normal to superior range. Her exact words were, Mrs. Prescott demonstrates no evidence of cognitive impairment. Her intellectual functioning is consistent with a highly educated, cognitively active individual. There is no clinical basis for a finding of incompetency. 99th percentile. I thought about what that meant. It meant that out of 100 people my age, I was performing at or above the level of 99 of them. It meant that the woman Jocelyn had described in her affidavit, the confused, forgetful, stove-leaving, garden-wandering ghost, did not exist. She had never existed. She was a fiction written to justify a theft. And now we had the clinical proof to demonstrate it. 13 pages, Patricia said. Dr. Chen's report is 13 pages of detailed analysis. Dr. Shelton's letter is 1 page of unsupported conclusions from a doctor who never met you, in a specialty he does not hold, paid for by the people who stand to profit from your incapacitation. I placed my hand on the calendar. October 28th was 9 days away when the petition arrived. Now it was 8. The magnolia outside the study window was still green, still steady, still rooted in soil Thomas had prepared decades ago. And somewhere in Hendersonville, a man named Raymond Shelton had a 1-page letter with my name on it that was about to cost him everything. We are ready, I said. Almost, Patricia replied. There is one more thing I need to prepare. The root clause. The night before the hearing, I did not sleep. I did not try. There are nights that belong to rest, and nights that belong to reckoning, and I have lived long enough to know the difference. I made a pot of chamomile tea, carried it to Thomas's study, and sat in his chair with the drafting lamp, casting a warm circle on the desk, the only light in the house. Patricia had spent the afternoon walking me through what to expect. She came to my house rather than asking me to drive to her office. A small courtesy that told me she understood the weight of what tomorrow held. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus and Jocelyn had placed the mortgage application 3 weeks earlier. And Patricia laid out her strategy, the way I imagined a general lays out a campaign. Methodical, precise, every move connected to the next. Garrett Webb will speak first, she said. He will present Marcus and Jocelyn as loving family members who have exhausted every private option and are turning to the court as a last resort. He will introduce Dr. Shelton's letter. He will call Jocelyn to the stand. Jocelyn will cry, She will describe your confusion, your hostility, your refusal to accept help. She will make the courtroom feel her pain because that is what she does. She turns performance into evidence. And Marcus? Webb may call Marcus briefly. Marcus is not the architect of this plan. He is the face. The grieving son. Webb will use him to create sympathy, then pivot quickly back to Jocelyn and Shelton. Patricia opened her briefcase and removed a folder I had not seen before. It was thicker than any folder she had brought to our previous meetings, and the tab was labeled in red ink. This is our response. I will not present it all at once. I will let Webb build his case. Let him lay every brick. Let him believe the wall is solid. And then, I will remove the foundation. She walked me through the sequence. First, she would cross-examine Jocelyn, methodically exposing the inconsistencies in her affidavit. The stove Jocelyn claimed I left unattended was an induction cooktop that shuts off automatically after 30 minutes of inactivity. The garden wandering Jocelyn described as abnormal was documented in 19 years of garden club records as my standard horticultural practice. The paranoid accusations Jocelyn attributed to me were supported by bank records, fraud reports, and law enforcement documentation. Second, Patricia would address Dr. Shelton. She would not attack his character. She would attack his calendar. She would present his appointment log showing Eleanor Prescott at 2:15 on October 16th, then present the sworn statements from 7 garden club members confirming I was in Asheville at 2:45 the same day. She would present his billing records showing payment before conclusions. She would present his history of 7 prior guardianship evaluations alongside Garrett Webb. And she would place Dr. Amara Chen's 13-page report beside Shelton's 1-page letter and let the comparison speak for itself. Third, and this was the part Patricia had saved for last, she would introduce the Prescott-Thomas Trust. The trust changes the motive calculus entirely, she said. Right now, the petition frames this as a family concerned about an elderly woman with modest assets. $2,600 a month, $78,000 in retirement, a house worth $420,000. That is the picture Webb has painted. When I introduce a $50 million trust that Marcus and Jocelyn did not know existed, the judge will see the real picture. This was never about protecting you. It was about controlling whatever they could reach, because they did not know how much more there was. And the root clause? Patricia smiled for the first time since I had met her. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who has been assembling a mechanism for weeks and has just heard it click into place. The root clause is the last thing I present. After the judge has heard about the fraud, the identity theft, the fabricated medical evaluation, and the $50 million trust, I will read the 3 conditions aloud: financial responsibility, ethical conduct, good faith engagement, and I will demonstrate, point by point, that Marcus has violated everyone. The root clause does not just protect the trust. It proves that Thomas Prescott anticipated exactly this scenario. It proves that the man whose legacy Marcus claims to be protecting built a mechanism specifically designed to stop Marcus from doing what he is doing. Patricia left at 7. I walked her to the door and thanked her, and she paused on the porch and looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. It was not professional confidence. It was something more personal. Mrs. Prescott, I have practiced elder law for 22 years. I have represented dozens of clients in guardianship disputes. Many of them were frightened. Some of them were confused. A few of them were genuinely declining and needed help. But I have never represented anyone who was more clearly competent, more thoroughly prepared, or more deliberately targeted than you. She paused. Tomorrow is not going to be easy. Jocelyn will perform. Webb will posture. Your son will sit across the courtroom and refuse to look at you. But when it is over, the record will show the truth. And the truth, in my experience, is the only thing that survives a courtroom. After she left, I washed the teacups and set them on the drying rack. I swept the kitchen floor. I watered the herbs on the windowsill, the rosemary and thyme and basil that I grew year-round, because a kitchen without living things is just a room with appliances. These were small acts, ordinary acts. The rituals of a woman who has lived alone for 6 years and has found in routine a kind of companionship that does not require another voice. Then I went to Thomas's study and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, beneath a stack of old drafting papers, was a photograph I had not looked at in years. It was Marcus at 7 years old, standing in the garden, holding a trowel, grinning at the camera with dirt on his nose and a tomato seedling in his other hand. Thomas had taken the photograph on a Saturday morning in April. I remembered because the dogwoods were blooming in the background, and Marcus had insisted on planting the seedling himself, refusing help, determined to do it right. I held the photograph under the drafting lamp and studied my son's face. 7 years old, dirt on his nose, a seedling in his hand. That boy had grown into a man who forged his mother's signature, stole her savings, hired a doctor to declare her incompetent, and filed a lawsuit to take control of her life. Somewhere between that garden and this courtroom, something had gone wrong, something I had not seen or had not wanted to see. A root that turned before it reached good soil, a branch that grew toward shade instead of light. I placed the photograph face down on the desk. I could not look at it and prepare for tomorrow at the same time. Some forms of love require you to set them aside, not because they do not matter, but because they will break your focus at the moment you need it most. I turned off the drafting lamp. The house was dark and quiet and mine. Tomorrow, I would walk into a courtroom and fight for the right to keep it that way. I whispered to the empty room, "I am ready, Thomas." The magnolia outside the window stood black against the stars, its branches wide and unmoving, holding their shape the way only deep roots allow. The Buncombe County Courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, the scent of institutions that have witnessed more grief than they can hold. I arrived at 8:30, half an hour before the hearing was scheduled to begin. Patricia had told me to wear something simple, something that looked like who I was, rather than who I was trying to be. I chose a navy blue cardigan over a white blouse, the pearl necklace Thomas had given me, and flat shoes that would not make my knees ache if I had to stand for a long time. I carried a leather folder Thomas had used for his drafting presentations, the kind with brass clasps that still closed smoothly after 30 years. Patricia was already inside, seated at the respondent's table with 2 binders open in front of her and a legal pad filled with her impossibly small handwriting. She wore a dark gray suit and no jewelry except a watch. She looked up when I entered and nodded once, the way a pilot nods at a co-pilot before takeoff. Everything has been checked. Everything is in place. Now, we fly. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. 2 tables facing the bench. A witness stand to the left. A gallery with 5 rows of wooden pews, the kind you see in old churches, scarred with decades of restless hands. Judge Caroline Marsh's nameplate sat on the bench, polished brass against dark wood. I had looked her up the previous week. Appointed to the Superior Court in 2012. Former family law practitioner, known for thorough questioning and low tolerance for theatrics. Patricia had said that was good for us. Marcus and Jocelyn were already seated at the petitioner's table. I had not seen my son in 23 days, not since the evening I pushed him and Jocelyn out of my kitchen after refusing to sign the mortgage application. He looked thinner. His shirt collar was loose around his neck, and his tie was knotted slightly off-center. A detail Thomas would have noticed and corrected without saying a word. Marcus did not look at me when I entered. He stared at the table in front of him with the fixed concentration of a man trying very hard not to see what was happening around him. Jocelyn, by contrast, looked directly at me. She was wearing a soft pink blouse and a small gold cross necklace I had never seen her wear before. Her hair was pulled back, and her makeup was minimal, the kind of deliberate understatement that requires more effort than abundance. She had dressed as a devoted daughter-in-law. She had costumed herself in concern. I recognized the performance because I had spent 40 years studying organisms that survive by mimicry. insects that look like leaves, flowers that smell like rotting meat to attract the pollinators they need. Jocelyn was displaying protective coloration, and it was flawless. Garrett Webb sat beside them. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed back and a navy suit that fit him the way expensive suits do, without apology. He had a leather portfolio and a single glass of water, and he carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had won this kind of case many times and expected to win it again. Behind the petitioner's table, in the gallery's first row, sat a woman I did not recognize. She was perhaps 45, with a clipboard and a neutral expression. And Patricia leaned toward me and whispered, "That is Miss Rivera from Adult Protective Services. The court requested her presence. She has reviewed the petition and my response. She is here to observe and may be asked to testify." I looked at the gallery. Lucille was there, seated in the third row, wearing her best Sunday coat, her hands folded in her lap with the composure of a woman who had sat in courtrooms more times than she could count. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, the kind that carries more weight than applause. At 9 o'clock precisely, Judge Caroline Marsh entered through a side door. She was tall, perhaps 60, with short auburn hair and glasses with thin silver frames. She moved with the unhurried authority of someone who controlled the room simply by being in it. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Marsh sat, adjusted her glasses, opened a folder, and looked at the petitioner's table. "Mr. Webb, this is your petition. You may proceed." Garrett Webb stood with the practiced ease of a man who had made this motion 100 times. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, a gesture so smooth it seemed rehearsed, and stepped toward the bench. "Your Honor, thank you. My clients, Marcus and Jocelyn Prescott, come before this court today, not as adversaries of Eleanor Prescott, but as her family, as her protectors. They are here because they love her, and because love sometimes requires us to make difficult decisions on behalf of those who can no longer make them for themselves." He paused. The pause was calculated. I could see it the way I could see the architecture of a root system when the soil is washed away. Every silence was structural. Eleanor Prescott is 69 years old. She lives alone in a home that requires constant maintenance. She manages her own finances without oversight. She has refused, repeatedly, her family's offers of assistance. Over the past 6 months, her son and daughter-in-law have observed a troubling pattern of cognitive decline, confusion about financial matters, difficulty remembering recent events, hostility toward family members who express concern, and most alarmingly, paranoid accusations that her own son is attempting to steal from her. I sat perfectly still. Patricia had told me this was coming. She had told me to listen without reacting, to let Webb build his wall brick by brick, because every brick he laid was a brick she would later remove. To support this petition, we will present testimony from Jocelyn Prescott, who has witnessed this decline firsthand. We will present a medical evaluation from Dr. Raymond Shelton, a physician who examined Mrs. the Ferdy inside it, of .com, Prescott, and concluded that she exhibits signs of moderate cognitive decline, and we will ask this court to appoint Marcus Prescott as guardian of his mother's person and estate, so that she may receive the care and protection she deserves. Webb returned to his seat. Judge Marsh made a note, then looked at Patricia. "Miss Yamamoto, do you wish to make an opening statement?" Patricia stood. She did not button anything. She did not gesture. She simply stood, the way a tree stands, rooted and unhurried, and looked at the judge with the quiet certainty of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the record to confirm it. "Your Honor, I will reserve my opening statement. I would prefer to let the evidence speak first." Judge Marsh studied Patricia for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Mr. Webb, call your first witness." Webb straightened his tie. "The petitioner calls Jocelyn Ann Prescott." Jocelyn rose from her chair. She smoothed her pink blouse with both hands. a gesture so small and so perfect that it made her look nervous, even though I knew she was not. She walked to the witness stand with measured steps, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched her take her seat in the witness chair and adjust the microphone with trembling fingers. The trembling was new. I had never seen Jocelyn's hands tremble. I had seen them sign checks, open wine bottles, grip steering wheels in traffic, and point accusingly across my kitchen table. And not once had they trembled, but they trembled now. In front of a judge. Because trembling hands tell a story that words alone cannot. They say, I am fragile. I am frightened. I am here because I have no other choice. Patricia opened her second binder and uncapped her pen. She did not look at Jocelyn. She looked at her notes. And she waited. The performance was about to begin. Jocelyn began with the voice. It was lower than her natural register. Softer. The kind of voice people use when they are telling you something that costs them pain to say. I had heard Jocelyn's real voice for 7 years. I had heard it order wine at restaurants, argue with Marcus in their car when they thought the windows were rolled up, and deliver instructions to caterers at family gatherings with the precision of a field commander. That voice was clipped, efficient, and entirely in control. The voice she used on the witness stand was none of those things. It was a voice built for a courtroom, the way a stage set is built for an audience. Convincing from the front, hollow from behind. Garrett Webb stood at an angle that allowed him to face both Jocelyn and Judge Marsh. A positioning I suspected he had practiced many times. Mrs. Prescott, can you describe your relationship with your mother-in-law? Jocelyn's eyes glistened. Not tears. Not yet, but the promise of them. The shimmer that precedes the performance. Eleanor has been like a mother to me. When Marcus and I got married, she welcomed me into her home and into her family without reservation. She taught me about gardening. She told me stories about Thomas. She was warm and generous and sharp. Jocelyn paused, and her lower lip trembled with the same engineered precision as her hands. That is why this is so hard. Because the woman I am describing is not the woman I have seen over the past 6 months. Webb nodded sympathetically. Can you tell the court what changes you observed? Jocelyn folded her hands in her lap. It started with small things. She would repeat a story she had told us 20 minutes earlier. She would call Marcus by Thomas's name. She would forget that we had made plans for dinner and then become upset when we arrived. Jocelyn blinked, and the first tear slid down her left cheek. One tear. Perfectly timed. Then it became more serious. I visited her in August and found the stove burner on with nothing on it. She said she had been making tea but could not remember starting it. In September, she accused Marcus of moving things in her house, rearranging her papers, taking documents from Thomas's study. She became hostile, paranoid. She said things that did not make sense. I listened with my hands folded on the table. My posture as still as the magnolia outside my window on a windless day. Every word Jocelyn spoke was a seed planted in contaminated soil. The stove she described was an induction cooktop with an automatic shutoff. I had never called Marcus by Thomas's name because the two men were nothing alike. Not in voice, not in bearing, not in character. And the accusation about moving papers in Thomas's study was not paranoia. It was fact. I had discovered in October that documents were missing from Thomas's filing cabinet. Documents that later appeared in the fraudulent HELOC application. Webb continued. Mrs. Prescott, did you and Marcus attempt to help Eleanor manage her finances? We tried, Jocelyn said. Her voice cracked on the word tried, a fracture so precise it could have been scored with a glass cutter. We suggested setting up a joint account so we could help pay her bills. We offered to accompany her to her bank appointments. We even presented her with a financial opportunity, a property investment that would have provided her with long-term security. She refused everything. She became angry. She accused us of trying to steal from her. The financial opportunity. $700,000. A mortgage application with my name, forged on the borrower line. Jocelyn had just described the single most damning piece of evidence against her as an act of generosity. And she had done it without blinking, without hesitation, with the steady confidence of someone who believed that if you say a lie gently enough, it becomes indistinguishable from the truth. Webb shifted his stance. In your opinion, is Eleanor Prescott capable of managing her own financial and personal affairs? Jocelyn looked at Judge Marsh. Not at Webb. Not at me. Directly at the judge. Your Honor, I love my mother-in-law. I do not want to be here. But Eleanor is not the woman she was. She is confused. She is vulnerable. She is living alone in a house she cannot maintain, making decisions she does not fully understand, and pushing away the only family she has left. Another tear. Right cheek this time. If something happens to her, if she falls, if she signs something she should not sign, if she gives her money to a stranger who knocks on her door, Marcus and I will never forgive ourselves for not acting when we had the chance. The courtroom was quiet. I could hear the ventilation system humming above the ceiling tiles. I could hear the clerk's pen scratching on paper. And I could hear, beneath Jocelyn's manufactured grief, the cold machinery of a woman who had rehearsed every syllable. Webb turned to Judge Marsh. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Marsh made a note, then looked at Patricia. Miss Yamamoto. Your witness. Patricia stood slowly. She picked up a single sheet of paper from her binder, held it at her side, and walked toward the witness stand with the unhurried gait of someone who has all the time in the world and intends to use every second of it. She stopped 6 feet from Jocelyn and looked at her the way I look at a plant I have not yet identified. Not with hostility, with curiosity, with the patient attention of someone who knows that classification requires observation before judgment. Mrs. Prescott, Patricia said, you mentioned that you found Eleanor's stove burner on with nothing on it during a visit in August. Can you tell me the date of that visit? Jocelyn blinked. I do not remember the exact date. Was it a weekday or a weekend? I believe it was a Saturday. Morning or afternoon? Afternoon. And the stove? Can you describe it? Jocelyn hesitated for the first time. It was brief, no more than a heartbeat. But I saw it. Patricia saw it. And I suspected Judge Marsh saw it too. It was the stove in Eleanor's kitchen. Is it a gas stove or an electric stove? I am not certain. Patricia looked at her sheet of paper. Eleanor Prescott's kitchen contains a GE profile induction cooktop, model PHP 9036 STSS, installed in 2019. Induction cooktops do not use open flames or traditional heating elements. They heat only when a compatible pan is placed on the surface. If no pan is detected for 30 minutes, the unit shuts off automatically. Patricia looked up from the paper. Mrs. Prescott, are you telling this court that you found an induction cooktop with an automatic safety shutoff operating dangerously with nothing on it? Jocelyn's hands, which had trembled so convincingly minutes earlier, were now perfectly still. I may be mistaken about the details. It was several months ago. You may be mistaken, Patricia repeated, letting the words settle into the courtroom air like dust in a beam of light. She returned to the respondent's table, set down the sheet of paper, and picked up another. The first brick had been removed. The wall was still standing, but it would not stand for long. Patricia picked up the second sheet of paper and held it the way a botanist holds a specimen slide, with care and certainty, knowing exactly what it contained and exactly what it would reveal. She walked back toward Jocelyn, who had adjusted her posture in the witness chair, sitting straighter now, her shoulders pulled back slightly, the way an animal repositions when it senses the ground shifting beneath it. Mrs. Prescott, in your affidavit, you stated that Eleanor accused Marcus of moving things in her house and taking documents from Thomas's study. You described this as paranoid behavior. Is that correct? Yes, Jocelyn said. She was very agitated. She believed Marcus had been going through Thomas's files, which he had not. Patricia nodded. I would like to introduce Respondent's Exhibit A. She handed a document to the clerk, who passed copies to the judge and to Garrett Webb. This is a certified copy of the fraudulent home equity line of credit application submitted to Wells Fargo on October 15th of this year in the name of Eleanor Ruth Prescott. The application includes Eleanor's full legal name, date of birth, social security number, and her mother's maiden name, Whitaker. It was submitted electronically at 8:17 in the evening. She turned back to Jocelyn. Mrs. Prescott, the security question on this application required the applicant's mother's maiden name. That maiden name, Whitaker, is not public information. It is not listed on any publicly available document. Eleanor has confirmed that she shared this name with Marcus 6 years ago during the processing of her late husband's estate. Patricia paused. Can you explain how this maiden name appeared on an application Eleanor did not submit? Jocelyn looked at Garrett Webb. It was a fast glance, less than a second, but it traveled across the courtroom like a flare. Webb did not move. He did not object. He sat with his pen resting on his legal pad, and for the first time since the hearing began, his expression carried something other than confidence. It carried calculation. I have no knowledge of that application, Jocelyn said. You have no knowledge, Patricia repeated. She set down the exhibit and picked up another document. Respondent's Exhibit B. This is a certified statement from Truist Bank, confirming that a checking account was opened on October 15th in the name of Eleanor Ruth Prescott. The account was funded with a $15,000 transfer from a joint savings account held by Eleanor and Marcus Prescott. The same day, a cashier's check for $15,000 was issued from this account, payable to Blue Ridge Premium Properties. Patricia looked at Jocelyn. Blue Ridge Premium Properties is the holding company that manages the property listed on the $700,000 mortgage application you presented to Eleanor. Were you aware of this account? No. Were you aware that $15,000 was withdrawn from Eleanor's savings? No. Were you aware that this money was used as a deposit on the property you and Marcus asked Eleanor to finance? Jocelyn's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, invisible to anyone who was not watching for it, but I was watching. I had spent my life watching for the small movements that reveal what is happening beneath the surface. In plants, it is the slight curl of a leaf before wilt sets in. In people, it is the jaw, the hands, the almost imperceptible stiffening of the spine when the body knows the mind is about to lie. I was not aware of the specific financial arrangements Marcus made, Jocelyn said carefully. Marcus handled the financial details. Patricia let the sentence hang in the courtroom air. Marcus handled the financial details. It was a deflection, so transparent, it was almost generous. A gift wrapped in panic and handed directly to the defense. Jocelyn, who had worked in commercial lending for 9 years. Jocelyn, who had arrived at my kitchen carrying a mortgage application inside a leather folder. Jocelyn, who had calculated the terms, rehearsed the pitch, and delivered it with the precision of a closing agent, was now claiming she knew nothing about the financial details. I see, Patricia said. She returned to the respondent's table, set down Exhibit B, and opened a third folder. Respondent's Exhibit C. This is the employment record of Marcus David Prescott, obtained through subpoena from his former employer, Meridian Event Solutions. Marcus was terminated from his position as Regional Event Coordinator on April 3rd of this year. The stated reason for termination was misappropriation of client funds totaling approximately $5,000. She handed copies to the clerk. Marcus has been unemployed for approximately 6 months. During that period, his household income has consisted solely of Jocelyn's earnings. Is that correct? Jocelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at Marcus. This time the look was longer, 3 seconds, maybe 4, and it contained something I had not seen from Jocelyn before. Not anger, not fear. Blame. She was looking at her husband the way you look at a tool that has broken at the worst possible moment. And I understood then. With the clarity of someone who has spent a lifetime studying systems, that Jocelyn and Marcus were not equal partners in this scheme. Jocelyn was the architect. Marcus was the material. And the material was failing. Marcus's employment situation is a private family matter, Jocelyn said. It became a public matter when you filed a petition asking this court to give Marcus control over his mother's finances, Patricia replied. Her voice did not rise. It did not sharpen. It maintained the same measured cadence it had carried since the first question. And that steadiness was more devastating than any raised voice could have been. It was the steadiness of a river that does not need to rush because it knows it will eventually reach the sea. Patricia turned to Judge Marsh. Your Honor, I would also like to enter Respondent's Exhibit D. This is a summary of outstanding debts held by Marcus and Jocelyn Prescott, compiled from credit bureau records obtained through subpoena. The total includes approximately $83,000 in credit card debt across 7 accounts, a delinquent auto loan of $14,000, and 3 months of missed mortgage payments on their current residence in West Asheville. She placed the document on the clerk's desk. The numbers filled the courtroom the way cold air fills a greenhouse when someone leaves the door open in January. $83,000. $14,000. 3 months delinquent. These were not the finances of concerned family members acting out of love. These were the finances of desperate people acting out of need. People who had exhausted every legitimate resource and turned to the only one remaining. Their mother, Garrett Webb, stood. Objection, Your Honor. The respondent's financial records are not relevant to the question of Mrs. Prescott's competency. Judge Marsh looked at Patricia. Miss Yamamoto, Your Honor. The petitioners have asked this court to grant Marcus Prescott authority over his mother's finances. The petitioner's own financial condition is directly relevant to the question of motive. If the individuals seeking guardianship are in severe financial distress, the court must consider whether this petition is motivated by genuine concern for Eleanor Prescott's welfare or by a desire to access her assets. Judge Marsh turned to Webb. Overruled. The exhibits are admitted. Continue, Miss Yamamoto. Patricia nodded. She did not smile. She did not need to. The wall Garrett Webb had built so carefully in his opening statement was losing bricks faster than he could replace them, and everyone in the courtroom could see the daylight coming through. I have no further questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor. However, I reserve the right to recall Mrs. Prescott. Jocelyn stepped down from the witness stand. She walked back to the petitioner's table with her chin raised and her shoulders straight, maintaining the posture of a woman who believed she was still winning, but her hands were no longer trembling. They were clenched into fists at her sides, the knuckles white, and that told me everything her face refused to show. Patricia sat down beside me and wrote 3 words on her legal pad. She turned it so only I could read it. Shelton is next. Garrett Webb called Dr. Raymond Shelton to the stand with the confidence of a man playing a card he believed was an ace. Shelton entered from the side door the way witnesses do when they have been waiting in a separate room, slightly disoriented by the sudden exposure, blinking against the fluorescent light like someone emerging from a tunnel. He was perhaps 55, with thinning brown hair combed carefully across his scalp and a charcoal suit that fit him well enough to suggest he owned it specifically for courtroom appearances. He carried a leather folder, thinner than Jocelyn's, and he held it against his chest the way a student holds a textbook on the first day of school, protective, uncertain. He was sworn in. Webb approached. Dr. Shelton, can you state your qualifications for the court? Shelton recited his credentials with the practiced fluency of someone who had done it before. Board certified in internal medicine. 23 years of private practice in Hendersonville. Member of the American Medical Association. He listed 2 hospital affiliations and a string of continuing education credits that sounded impressive until you listened carefully and noticed that none of them pertained to neurology, psychiatry, or cognitive assessment. Dr. Shelton, did you conduct a cognitive evaluation of Eleanor Prescott on October 16th of this year? I did, Shelton said. His voice was steady but contained a thinness to it. The kind of thinness you hear in a branch that looks solid but has been hollowed out by insects. And what were your findings? Shelton opened his folder and read from his report. Mrs. Prescott presented with signs consistent with moderate cognitive decline. She exhibited difficulty with short-term recall, confusion regarding her financial arrangements, and impaired judgment regarding personal safety. Based on my clinical assessment, I concluded that Mrs. Prescott would benefit from supervised financial management and the appointment of a guardian to assist with daily decision-making. Webb nodded. Thank you, Dr. Shelton. No further questions. Judge Marsh turned to Patricia. Miss Yamamoto. Patricia stood. She did not pick up a document. She did not approach the witness stand immediately. She buttoned her jacket, adjusted her glasses, and walked toward Shelton with the unhurried deliberation of a woman who had been waiting for this moment since the day she first read his one-page letter. She stopped at a distance that was close enough to be direct but far enough to let silence fill the space between them. Dr. Shelton, you testified that you are board-certified in internal medicine. Is that correct? Yes. Are you board-certified in geriatric medicine? No. Are you board-certified in psychiatry? No. Are you board-certified in neuropsychology? No. Have you completed a fellowship in any specialty related to cognitive assessment or dementia diagnosis? No. But my clinical experience includes... Thank you, Dr. Shelton. Your clinical experience is noted. Patricia's interruption was surgical, not rude but absolute, the clean cut of a scalpel through tissue that needed to be separated before it could be examined. Now, your report states that you evaluated Eleanor Prescott on October 16th at 2:15 in the afternoon at your office in Hendersonville. Is that correct? That is correct. Patricia turned to the clerk. I would like to introduce Respondent's Exhibit E. She handed the document to the clerk, who distributed copies. This is a signed attendance roster from the Asheville Garden Club Steering Committee meeting held on October 16th at the Community Center on Cox Avenue. The meeting began at 2:45 in the afternoon. Eleanor Prescott is listed as present. The roster is signed by 7 members, including the club president, Helen Calloway. She let the exhibit reach every hand before she continued. Dr. Shelton, your office in Hendersonville is approximately 40 minutes by car from the Asheville Community Center on Cox Avenue. If Eleanor Prescott was in your office at 2:15, she could not have arrived at the community center by 2:45. And yet 7 witnesses have confirmed, under penalty of perjury, that she was there. Patricia paused. Can you explain this discrepancy? Shelton's hand moved to his tie. He adjusted it. A gesture that accomplished nothing except revealing that his fingers needed something to do. It is possible that my scheduling records contain an error regarding the exact time. An error regarding the exact time. Patricia repeated. Let us explore that possibility. I would like to introduce Respondent's Exhibit F. This is Dr. Shelton's billing record for the evaluation of Eleanor Prescott. The invoice was generated on October 16th, the same day as the alleged appointment, in the amount of $1,800. It was sent to an address on Mills River Road and paid by cashier's check on October 19th. The check was drawn on the joint account of Marcus and Jocelyn Prescott. She looked at Shelton. You billed for this evaluation on the day it supposedly occurred and were paid by the family members who filed the guardianship petition. Is that correct? My billing practices are standard for private consultations. Is it standard to bill a patient's family rather than the patient? Shelton did not answer. Is it standard to generate an invoice before completing your written evaluation, which was not dated until October 22nd, 6 days later? Shelton shifted in the witness chair. The leather folder on his lap had become something to grip rather than something to reference, and I could see the color changing in his neck, a slow flush rising above his collar the way heat rises through soil in midsummer. Patricia returned to the respondent's table. She opened a new folder and removed a thick document. Respondent's Exhibit G. This is the neuropsychological evaluation of Eleanor Prescott, conducted by Dr. Amara Chin, a board-certified geriatric neuropsychologist at Mission Hospital in Asheville. Dr. Chen evaluated Mrs. Prescott over 2 sessions totaling 4 hours. Her report is 13 pages. Patricia held up the document so the courtroom could see its thickness, then held up Shelton's one-page letter beside it. The visual contrast was devastating. A novel beside a napkin. A root system beside a cut flower. Dr. Chen's evaluation concludes that Eleanor Prescott demonstrates cognitive function in the 99th percentile for her age group. Memory, executive function, reasoning, language, spatial awareness, all within normal to superior range. Patricia read directly from the report. Mrs. Prescott demonstrates no evidence of cognitive impairment. Her intellectual functioning is consistent with a highly educated, cognitively active individual. There is no clinical basis for a finding of incompetency. She set both documents on the clerk's desk, side by side. Dr. Shelton, I would like to ask you one final question. In the past 4 years, you have served as the evaluating physician in 7 guardianship petitions filed in the Western North Carolina district. In 5 of those 7 cases, the petitioner's attorney was Garrett Webb. She paused and let the numbers settle into the silence the way a stone settles into still water. Is it your professional practice to provide cognitive evaluations exclusively for Mr. Webb's clients? Or is this pattern coincidental? Garrett Webb stood. Objection. Counsel is implying professional misconduct without foundation. Judge Marsh looked at Patricia, then at Webb, then at Shelton. Her expression had not changed since the hearing began, but her pen had stopped moving, which meant she was no longer taking notes. She was watching. Overruled, she said. The witness may answer. Shelton looked at his folder. He looked at Webb. He looked at the judge. And then he said, "The only thing a man can say, when every exit has been sealed and every lie has been mapped, I would like to consult with my own attorney before answering further questions." Patricia nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor." She returned to her seat beside me. She did not write anything on her legal pad. She did not need to. The wall Garrett Webb had built was no longer a wall. It was rubble. Judge Marsh called a 15-minute recess. The courtroom emptied slowly, people standing, stretching, whispering with the restrained urgency of spectators who have witnessed something they did not expect. Garrett Webb leaned toward Marcus and Jocelyn with his hand covering his mouth, speaking rapidly, his confidence replaced by the compressed energy of a man recalculating in real time. Marcus stared at the table. Jocelyn stared at Webb. Neither of them looked at me. Patricia and I remained at our table. She poured water from a small pitcher and set a glass in front of me. "When we return," she said quietly, "I am going to introduce the trust. Marcus will learn, for the first time, that you and Thomas built a $50 million estate he never knew existed. Jocelyn will learn it. Webb will learn it." She paused. "That moment will be difficult for you. I know. It will also be the moment the judge understands the true scope of what they were trying to take. Right now, the petition describes a woman with $2,600 a month and a house. When the trust enters the record, the judge will see that this guardianship was never about protecting you." The bailiff called the courtroom to order. Judge Marsh returned to the bench and nodded at Patricia. "Miss Yamamoto, you indicated you had additional evidence to present." "Yes, Your Honor." "I would like to call Eleanor Prescott to the stand." I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The leather was cool under my palm. I sat down and looked at Patricia, and she looked at me with a steadiness that said, "I am here. You are not alone." "Mrs. Prescott, are the financial assets described in the guardianship petition an accurate and complete representation of your estate?" "No, they are not." "Can you explain what has been omitted?" I folded my hands in my lap. Saying these words aloud meant releasing a secret Thomas and I had kept for 30 years. A secret we had agreed would remain hidden until it needed to become visible. That moment had arrived. In 1994, my late husband Thomas and I established an irrevocable trust called the Prescott Thomas Botanical Research Trust. The trust holds the intellectual property rights and accumulated royalties from a drought-resistant corn cultivar we developed together over 11 years of research. The cultivar was patented and licensed to an agricultural conglomerate, and the royalties have been reinvested continuously for 3 decades. I paused. The trust is currently valued at approximately $50 million. The courtroom did not gasp. What happened was worse. It went silent in a way that felt physical, as though the air itself had thickened and everyone was breathing through it slowly, trying to process a number that did not belong in a guardianship. Hearing about a woman who supposedly could not manage her own affairs, I looked at Marcus. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen. Not anger, not shock, but something deeper. It was the look of a man who has discovered that the ground beneath him is not ground at all, but a thin layer of ice over water he cannot see the bottom of. Jocelyn, beside him, had gone completely still. The stillness of a predator recalculating the distance to prey that has revealed itself to be something far larger than expected. Mrs. Prescott, does the trust contain any provisions governing how your descendants may access its assets? Patricia asked. Yes. The trust contains a provision my husband called the root clause. I turned to Judge Marsh. The root clause establishes 3 conditions that any secondary beneficiary must meet before receiving distributions. First, financial responsibility. No outstanding judgments, no bankruptcies, no unresolved debts exceeding $10,000 in the preceding 5 years. Second, ethical conduct. No felony convictions, no pending criminal charges, and no civil findings of fraud, exploitation, or abuse against any family member. Third, good faith engagement. The beneficiary must not have attempted to access the trust through coercion, manipulation, deception, or legal action designed to circumvent the grantor's wishes. I let each condition settle into the courtroom the way seeds settle into prepared soil, each one finding its place, each one carrying the potential to grow into something that could not be ignored. If a beneficiary fails any condition, the trustee is authorized to suspend their distributions permanently. The funds are redirected to the trust's charitable purpose, funding botanical research scholarships at land-grant universities across the southeastern United States. Judge Marsh wrote steadily. Garrett Webb had stopped writing entirely. He was looking at his clients with the expression of a man who has realized the house he built was constructed on someone else's land. Patricia turned to the court. Your Honor, I would like to summarize the relevance of the root clause to this proceeding. Marcus David Prescott currently carries $83,000 in credit card debt, a delinquent auto loan, and 3 months of missed mortgage payments. He was terminated from employment for misappropriation of $5,000. He has committed identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation against his own mother. And he has filed this guardianship petition, a legal action designed to circumvent the grantor's wishes. She paused. Marcus Prescott has violated all 3 conditions of the root clause. Every single one. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a courtroom that has watched a case turn inside out, revealing that the people who claimed to be protectors were predators, and the woman they called incompetent had been, all along, the guardian of a fortune they never knew existed. I looked at Marcus one more time. His hands were flat on the table. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, somewhere in the distance where the son he used to be and the man he had become had finally met each other and found nothing to say. Thomas had written the root clause at our kitchen table in 1994, with coffee in one hand and a pen in the other. He had said to me, "If our son grows into a good man, this clause will never matter. And if he doesn't, it will matter more than anything else in this trust." I sat on the witness stand and understood, for the first time in 30 years, that Thomas had not been writing a legal provision. He had been writing a prophecy. Judge Caroline Marsh did not deliberate for long. She announced that she would deliver her ruling after a brief review of the exhibits, and she retired to her chambers for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 minutes, Because I watched the clock on the courtroom wall the way I used to watch the thermometer in my greenhouse during a late frost, counting each minute as a measure of survival. Patricia sat beside me with her hands folded on the table, her binders closed, her legal pad turned face down. She had done everything she could. The evidence was in the record. The lies had been identified, documented, and dismantled. Now the decision belonged to someone else. And Patricia was not the kind of person who wasted energy on outcomes she could not control. She waited the way. Deep-rooted trees wait for rain. Without anxiety, without performance. Simply present. Marcus and Jocelyn sat across the aisle in silence. Webb had stopped whispering to them. There was nothing left to whisper. Jocelyn's pink blouse had lost its softening effect under the fluorescent lights, and the gold cross necklace looked less like devotion and more like a prop from a play that had closed early. Marcus had not looked at me since I said the words $50 million. He had not looked at anyone. He sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the table, and I thought of the tomato seedling in the photograph, the boy with dirt on his nose, and I felt something that was not anger and not grief, but the place where those two rivers meet and become something without a name. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. Judge Marsh returned to the bench. She placed a single sheet of paper in front of her, put on her glasses, and looked at the petitioner's table. I have reviewed the petition, the supporting exhibits, the respondent's evidence, and the testimony presented today. I will address each element of this case before delivering my ruling. She began with Dr. Shelton. The medical evaluation submitted by Dr. Raymond Shelton is not credible. Dr. Shelton is not board certified in any specialty related to cognitive assessment. His appointment records conflict with documented evidence that Mrs. Prescott was at another location during the alleged evaluation. His billing records indicate payment by the petitioners before the evaluation report was completed. This court finds that the evaluation was fabricated and will refer the matter to the North Carolina Medical Board for further investigation. She turned to Jocelyn's testimony. The sworn affidavit of Jocelyn Prescott contains multiple material inconsistencies, including the description of a dangerous stove incident involving an induction cooktop with automatic safety shutoff. The court finds this testimony unreliable. She turned to the financial evidence. The respondent has presented documented proof that the petitioners committed identity theft, bank fraud, and financial exploitation against Eleanor Prescott, including a fraudulent home equity line of credit application, a fraudulently opened bank account, and the unauthorized withdrawal of $15,000. These actions do not reflect the behavior of concerned family members. They reflect the behavior of individuals in financial distress seeking access to resources that do not belong to them. Judge Marsh paused and removed her glasses. She looked at Marcus directly, and for the first time in the hearing, her expression carried something beyond judicial neutrality. It was not sympathy. It was not contempt. It was the weary recognition of a judge who has seen this pattern before and knows exactly what it costs. Mr. Prescott, this court has reviewed your employment history, your financial records, and the actions you have taken against your mother over the past month. You were terminated from your position for misappropriation of client funds. You carry substantial consumer debt. You are 3 months behind on your own mortgage. And yet you have asked this court to grant you authority over your mother's finances. She replaced her glasses. The petition for guardianship is denied. The request to appoint Marcus Prescott as guardian of Eleanor Prescott's person and estate is denied. This court finds no evidence of cognitive impairment or incapacity. To the contrary, the neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Amara Chen demonstrates that Mrs. Prescott functions in the 99th percentile for her age group. She made This court further orders that all evidence. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down once. The sound was small and sharp, like a branch, snapping under weight. It was never meant to carry. Lucille was the first person to reach me. She crossed the gallery with the steady pace of a woman who had waited 31 years for verdicts and knew that the moments after them mattered more than the moments during. She took my hand and held it without speaking, and I held hers back. And for a few seconds, The courtroom fell away, and it was just two women, standing in the space between justice and grief, which is narrower than most people think. Patricia shook my hand at the respondents' table. The referral to the district attorney means this is not over for Marcus and Jocelyn. Criminal charges are likely. Shelton will face the medical board. She paused. And the root clause is now part of the court record. Sandra Lou will receive certified copies. The suspension of Marcus's beneficiary status will be processed according to the trust terms. I nodded. $50 million would not go to my son. It would go to scholarships, to research, to young scientists who would carry forward the work Thomas and I had started in our greenhouse 40 years ago. The money would grow roots in soil we would never see, and it would feed people we would never meet. And that was exactly what Thomas had intended. I walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon. The air was cool and bright, the Blue Ridge visible above the rooftops, the oaks along Haywood Street dropping their leaves in slow spirals. Lucille walked beside me to the parking lot. She did not offer commentary or consolation. She simply walked, and her presence was enough. I drove home through the mountain roads with the windows down. When I pulled into the driveway, the magnolia was waiting, its branches wide and dark against the autumn sky. I got out of the car and stood in front of it for a long time. I placed my hand on the trunk the way I had done 10,000 times before, feeling the bark under my palm, feeling the life moving inside it, slow and steady and older than any argument, any courtroom, any betrayal. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, I received a letter from Sandra Lou, confirming that the first Prescott Thomas Botanical Research Scholarship had been awarded to a 23-year-old graduate student at North Carolina State University. Her name was Maria Santos. She was studying drought-resistant grain cultivation in sub-Saharan Africa. Sandra included a photograph. Maria was standing in a greenhouse, holding a seedling, grinning at the camera with dirt on her hands. I pinned the photograph to the wall of Thomas's study, next to the drafting lamp, next to our magnolia photograph, next to the image of Marcus at 7 years old, with a tomato seedling and dirt on his nose. 2 photographs of 2 young people holding 2 small plants, separated by decades and circumstances and choices, connected by the same fragile hope that something you nurture today will grow into something the world needs tomorrow. I went outside. The magnolia was blooming, its white flowers open against the April sky like hands releasing something they had held for a very long time. I touched the lowest branch. The bark was warm from the sun. "It grew, Thomas," I said. "Everything you planted, it all grew."